Good morning. So I've decided I need to get myself another standing desk. I used to have one when I started doing breath work virtually because I feel like I'm much more in my communicative power when I'm standing up than when I'm sitting. And I'm going to do my best during these lives to continue to channel the vibes and how excited I feel when I'm speaking in person on stage in front of groups. I'm trying to transmit that through the ethers of the internet. Anywho, I am here today because I want to talk about something that I have been studying in my own life, writing about in my book that will be launching later this year. One of the two books that I've been writing under the working title, The Brand That Breathes. And I wanted to talk about this here today because it keeps coming up for me over and over again while I'm reflecting on my own life, but also as I am working with people inside my breathwork programs, inside my entrepreneurial spaces where I'm coaching people in their business and their purpose and their passion. Comes up in conversation with my partner Levi and I all the time, where we talk about our entrepreneurial journey and everything that we've gone through. And what I want to talk about briefly here is what I like to call the pivot cycle. You've probably all been through it at some point in your life. You've probably all experienced this. But this is the cycle that we move through anytime we're coming up against or choosing or being forced to experience drastic change in our lives. And the big backbone of the book that I'm writing right now is the idea that I have chosen two seemingly very drastic pivots professionally in my careers, which also reflected and affected my entire life, my family, my relationships, all of that. I made these two massive changes in my life, and both of them followed the same kind of cycle. And from the moment that I started to recognize that I wanted to make a change, to having the awareness that I wanted to make the change, when I was resistant to making said change, taking the leap without the net, experiencing the messy middle or the void, the unknown, and then the integration. And then there is this final space that I feel like I'm experiencing again right now in my life, which is called the expansion. And so this is really what my book is going to be about. I'm going to be talking a lot about, I have been in the writing, my own personal experiences. The two experiences that are the main crux of the book is when my life back in 2010, 2011 looked really great on paper. I was super successful in the television broadcasting industry in downtown Toronto from a pretty young age. I was going to parties. I was meeting celebrities. Everything looked good on paper. But on the inside, I was dying. And then I decided to leave that life and move to Costa Rica and sell everything and did my Eat, Pray, Love thing. From the outside, everyone thought I was crazy. It looked nuts. And then again, a decade later, I was living my seemingly perfect life in paradise, living in Costa Rica. And from all external information that people could see, everything looked great. But again, on the inside, I was dealing with a lot of questions, and I was feeling out of alignment with a lot of areas in my life that I was living from, and my integrity came into question. If I'd stayed living the way that I was, then I wouldn't be walking in congruence with who I say that I am. And so I made another massive pivot, left my life in Costa Rica behind, gave away, sold 10 years worth of stuff that I collected during that time, and packed my two young children, my dog and my husband, up, and we moved back to small town Ontario, the exact same area that I grew up in, where all of my trauma began. And so why did I do this? And this book that I'm writing is going to answer that question, but it's also going to help answer the question as to why so many of us do it. And a lot of us don't even understand at the time. We call it a midlife crisis. We call it going through our solar return at 29. We call it all of these different things. And this book is really about moving through the pivot cycle. It's really talking about what it is, giving it a name, giving it a structure so that we can better understand it when we find ourselves moving through these different phases at any time in our life. So the first stage is what I just simply call the successful stage. It's when life looks good on paper. It's when you have the career, you have ticked off all of the boxes that you consciously wanted to tick off in your life. Maybe you have the relationship, as an entrepreneur, you've built the business, you have the title, the prestige, the accolades, all of that. And everyone thinks that you've made it. But for you, something feels a little bit off. Okay. And you probably can't place it when you're in it. In fact, when you're in this stage, you're probably not even fully aware of this feeling of things being off because you're so in the do. You're on the hamster wheel. You're just living life. You're making things happen. And I know for me, when I was in television, there was a lot of reasons why my life felt off while I was in TV behind the scenes. Not only was I not happy in my career from a soul level, I was also an alcoholic. I was also actively bulimic. I had not done any personal development work per se. And so there was a lot of stuff that was making me feel off. But then I started to recognize about 8-9 years into my career in television that it wasn't fulfilling for me anymore. And I wouldn't have been able to place it back then because I had so much other shadow work and that I would have needed to do to really understand that, because I didn't even understand the concept of being conscious, having a soul, all of that stuff. While I was experiencing it in some capacities, I didn't fully understand it. So then what comes, the next stage of this cycle is called the niggle. This is when we start to get the whispers, when we start to translate that feeling of unease into an awareness, right? This is why we call it a niggle. Perhaps we start to find that we are like noticing our boredom in our life, or we're noticing that we're feeling restless in the day-to-day. There's this feeling of unease, or maybe even a feeling or a sense that there is something else trying to emerge. So sometimes we start to feel like we want to crawl out of our skin when this niggle takes place. And the funny thing is, and the unfortunate thing is, and the true thing is that many of us ignore this stage for years. And again, for me, I know in TV, I did that. Instead of really sitting with what was coming up for me, what I did instead is I just quit. I would quit working for one network. Didn't like my job at City TV. I'm going to go work for CTV. This doesn't feel right. It must be CTV. I'm going to go work for Sun TV, which no longer exists. And that's what I did for a long time. And all the while blaming everything else and everyone else, instead of recognizing like, this is not my path, I was like, they're all the problem. I need to change the scenery and then it's going to fix. So really just putting a Band-Aid on this issue. And I went further into my addictions because I was feeling this feeling of unease, that I was out of alignment. And instead of just feeling with it and trying to figure out what it meant, I would just drink myself numb. So then things started to shift for me back in 2010, 2011. I had a whole lot of stuff going on in my life that made me start to question a lot of things. When my dad was diagnosed with frontal temporal dementia in 2011, it was February of 2011. No, sorry, February of 2010. That was the first time I quit my career in TV. For no other reason that I couldn't emotionally handle working. I actually quit work altogether. Luckily, I was with a fiance at the time that could financially support me. But it was during that time where I was unemployed and left TV that I started to really consider that there might be other avenues for me to explore. Even though I felt a lot of resistance to it. I didn't have the capacity to work, but having that space and time to reflect, that's when I first explored becoming a fitness instructor and leaning into the wellness space. And I did my CanFit Pro certification as a group fitness instructor during that time. I never did anything with it. It was also during that year and a half after that I started working for a vegan restaurant chain in Toronto and started to get really more into that space of curiosity. But inevitably, when I went back into TV, because the resistance was real. because I thought if I try to go from working in this super successful career in TV into this wellness space, people will think I'm crazy. Like, what will they think? Oh, am I nuts? Is this nuts for me to think I can do this? Am I throwing everything away if I do this? What if I fail if I try to do this? So inevitably, my resistance won out, and I went back to TV, and I'm getting ended up working for the Weather Network for a little while. I took a job freelancing at the CBC News, the National for a while. And then eventually I got a full-time job again with Global Television. That lasted for about a year before that niggle and that whisper came up again. And it was when my dad passed away in May of 2009 that I couldn't continue to ignore the voice of my soul. And it was one day after my dad's funeral. He passed away May 29th, 2011. I went to Cuba by myself in June, got really drunk every single night, slept with random people. And in the mornings I would go and I would sit on the beach and I would stare out into the ocean and reflect. And I look back now and I understand that I was praying. I didn't call it that, but I was asking for a sign. And I said to the ocean one morning, I said, "What now?" And the ocean said to me, "Spirit, my soul, do what you love." And I right away said, "Well, I don't know what I love. What do I love?" And I heard the words raw food and yoga. So these two things that I had dappled with in the years prior and something that I had played around with on a personal level, that dropped in as the path that I needed to follow. And so after that trip to Cuba, I got back to Toronto. I was working at this point, yet another job in TV. I was working as the associate producer on a reality show. I went into the office and I quit. And within weeks, had signed up for my very first yoga teacher training in downtown Toronto and started training with a raw vegan chef. Went on to become a certified culinary educator and began a business where I was not only making healthy food for other people, but I was teaching culinary classes and teaching other people how to create this kind of food for themselves while also learning how to hold space as a yoga teacher. And it was when I left TV fully it was 2013. I left, started working for a juice cleanse company for about a month. That didn't feel aligned. Got a job at an integrative health institute. Spent a year there knowing in my heart of hearts that this was just kind of a leap pad moment, that I wasn't going to be there permanently. And it was during my time working there, I went down to Costa Rica on a retreat. The owners of that retreat loved me. I loved them. They hired me. And it was over the summer of 2013 that I took the big leap and I sold off everything that I had in Toronto. And by September of 2013, I had moved to Central America. So this is where we come to stage 4, the leap. And this is where, for many of us, we make the move before certainty arrives. So it's like jumping without a net. And we're not doing it because we're fearless, but we do it because what we have figured out is that staying and keeping along the same path that we were on before, the one that we have been receiving all of these niggles and whispers and having these awarenesses, how out of alignment it was, staying in that life becomes more painful than actually leaving it and heading into this very scary space, which is the unknown. And so we leap. We leap before we're ready. We leap before we know the outcome. We commit before we have any evidence that it's going to work. And when we do that, it is powerful. It is liberating. And it's also very scary because then we end up in stage 5, which is called the void or the unknown. And this is the most overlooked stage when people talk about this work. This is this little moment in time, sometimes it's a big moment in time, where the old identity of who we were and the life we were living, it's gone. We've let it go. It is shed, but we haven't yet arrived at where we are headed. So the new identity hasn't dropped in yet. And there's usually a point in here that we start to think, oh, fuck, what have I done? I've made a mistake. How can I fix this? Should I go back? Can I ask for my job back? And trust me, I've been in the void before and done these things. I have asked for the job back in the past, and that's a story for another day. I think about this period. I mean, it comes up in so many different aspects of our life. So it's happened with me in these massive professional pivots, but I've also found myself in the void when I've lost babies. I've had 4 losses in my life. And the most recent one was just in 2024. I thought I was 11 and a half weeks pregnant when I found out that I was miscarrying, only to find out that the baby had stopped developing at 7 weeks. And the minute you find out you're pregnant, the path that you were on in your life, the trajectory that you're living, like there's pre-finding out you're pregnant, this is the way your life is going. Then you find out you're pregnant and you've planned out a whole other life that includes this baby. And then when you find out that you've lost that baby, neither of those paths are possible anymore. Neither of them make sense. So then you have to find a new one. And it's in that void where a lot of us, when we're in the grieving process after loss, that's what makes it so hard, I think, is that we're like, now what? Because that life I was living before the thought of this baby no longer fits and doesn't feel right. Obviously, I'm not having this baby anymore. So that life has dissolved before my eyes. And so we have to figure out a new trajectory, a new path. And like I said at the beginning of this conversation, sometimes these changes, these pivots, we're choosing them, they're conscious, and other times the universe hands them to us, like in that case of losing a baby. And so we're in this place of, who am I? And I think this is the most important stage that we need to give more attention to. Because everything that I've ever worked with clients on, whether it was working with them in their food and body image, eating disorder recovery space, the plant medicine, trauma recovery space, and understanding ourselves and the stories and the limiting beliefs and how our soul wants nothing more than for us to come back to the remembrance of who we are in the moment we were born, which is pure joy with no conditions, or now in the entrepreneurial space, is that this identity piece is the most overlooked. And just understanding that when we choose any change in our life, there's going to be this time. And if we can be aware of it, if we can be aware that there's going to be a moment that we're going to be flailing, that we don't know who we are, and that is what we fear the most, then it makes a whole lot easier. This is like when I moved back to Canada in 2023. I had lived in Costa Rica for a decade. I was this wellness, spiritual, medicine-loving, positive, affirmation, life is beautiful, pura vida. That was like so much of my identity. And all of a sudden I moved back to Canada and none of that was real for me anymore because that wasn't the life that I was living. I was not surrounded by it anymore. And I had a big identity shift. Like, who am I now? And it was terrifying. I went through periods of darkness, periods of depression, periods of, oh God, I'm not even going to lie. At one point I was like, do I need to go on medication? Because I was in such a dark place. And I look back now and I recognize that it's because I just didn't know who I was anymore. Because I had placed so much of who I was or who I thought I was on my career, on my roles in the world. So in order to get to stage 6, which is the integration stage, we have to start to recognize and fully own the fact and realize that none of the previous lives or identities were wasted and that everything gets to come with you. The way I look back at my life is the television director, the television producer, the one that commanded the control room. That version of me became the speaker, the one that has stood in front of thousands of people and shared and taught and workshopped. The writer in me, and I've been a writer since I was a young kid, and I'm still a writer, obviously I'm writing a book. That version of me has transformed into becoming the marketer. The breathwork facilitator becomes the brand strategist. The brand strategist is the breathwork facilitator. Nothing gets left behind because nothing in my life I know has been random, and nothing in your life has been random either. And it's not about putting down all of the pieces of our identity and like saying, okay, I'm done with you. This chapter is over. But can we start to extract the parts of those chapters that make sense and can be reapplied and transferred to our life today and integrate that? Bring it into the now. Instead of trying to separate and compartmentalize all of the aspects of ourselves, can we hold them? Can we hold them all? And then once we are able to do that, that's when we expand. We become larger than the single label that the world wants to put on us. And then maybe eventually the cycle begins again. All right, so I've gone on for a long, long time here. This is a little bit of a share about the book that is in the works. I'm grateful that you've been here today. If any of this lands, please shoot me a message. Let me know. I'd love to continue this conversation offline in the DMs. If you feel like any of this has been you in your life and you want a little extra support, more than happy. I still do some one-on-one coaching, consulting. I do breath work to help people integrate all of these phases and stages into their current experience of being a spiritual divine essence in human form. And I think that's it for now. I have gone on way too long. Okay, bye.